The Galactic Syndicate didn't believe in souls. They believed in data, extraction, and efficiency. They had abducted thousands of humans for study, dismissing us as soft, fragile, and utterly predictable. They thought we were a species of glass. Then they brought him aboard, expecting a specimen for a routine harvest. They didn't get a specimen. They got a nightmare that had been waiting for them to open the door. The flagship, the arbitrator, moved through the void with the silent, predatory grace of a shark. Inside, its corridors were a testament to the Syndicate's cold, immutable logic, walls of seamless, matte black composite that absorbed all light and sound. It was a space designed for perfection, for the systematic dismantling of life. They were collectors of biological curiosities. They sought the strongest, the fastest, the most dangerous. And in their arrogant cataloging of the multiverse, they had marked Earth as a low-priority acquisition. Specimen 892 arrived, the scanner chirped, the sound a sharp, discordant bleep in the sterile chamber. Hi, Commander Vax, a creature whose skin was a mosaic of bioluminescent scales, didn't even look up from his tactical display. He didn't need to. He had seen the harvest logs 1,000 times. The story was the same. A flash of light, a localized stasis field, a terrified biological organism dragged from its primitive habitat, and then the clinical silence of the examination bay. "What is the analysis?" Vax asked, his voice a rhythmic, grinding tone, like stones shifting in a deep riverbed. "Initial scan complete," the subordinate replied, its voice devoid of inflection. "The specimen is aberrant. It is a geriatric male of the Terran species. Physiological markers are failing. Cognitive coherence is near zero. High levels of neurodegradation." Vax finally looked up, his lidless eyes pulsing with a faint, irritated violet light. "Degraded? Why would the harvest drones bring us garbage? We require peak biological data, not sentient waste." "It appears to have been an automated capture, Commander. The drone simply swept the designated quadrant. It was the only organic signature within the radius." Vax stared at the monitor. There, projected in shimmering blue light, was the specimen. He looked frail, even in the projection. His skin was parchment thin, his posture slumped with the weight of decades. He wasn't wearing armor. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was wearing a soft, threadbare sweater, his eyes unfocused, staring at a point in space that didn't exist. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like an ending. "It is a mercy to dismantle him," Vax said, turning his back on the display. "If the Terran species produces specimens this broken, their collapse is merely a matter of linear time. Proceed with the standard neural harvest. Extract the memory matrices, salvage the usable biomass, and dump the carcass into the reactor. I want this efficiency error cleared from my deck within the hour." He didn't realize that in the examination room below, the sentient waste had just felt a draft. The specimen, Arthur, blinked slowly. The cold, sterile air of the Syndicate ship hit his skin, but it didn't register as a threat. His mind was a labyrinth of disconnected memories, a library where the books had fallen off the shelves and the titles had been erased. He knew he was somewhere else. He knew the air tasted like ozone and burnt copper, and he knew, with a faint, buried instinct that defied the decay of his brain, that he had been here before, or at least he had been somewhere like this. He looked at the containment field, a shimmering wall of hard light that hummed with enough energy to power a city. To a scientist, it was a miracle of engineering. To Arthur, it was just a rattling fan belt. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the surface. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He simply frowned. "The vibration," he whispered, his voice dry and fragile, a ghost of a sound in the immense chamber. "It's off. 2 cycles too fast. The tension, it's all wrong." Up on the bridge, Commander Vax was busy ignoring the data. He was looking at the stars, planning the next sector, already having forgotten the broken human in the containment bay. He thought he was the hunter. He thought he was the observer. He didn't know that the specimen was currently counting the seconds between the pulses of the containment field. And in that fragile, fractured mind, a locked door had just started to rattle. The subordinate moved to the console, its long, translucent fingers dancing across an interface of shifting light. "Commencing standard neural harvest," it announced, its voice as flat as a desert horizon. "Initiating neurosynaptic bypass. Subject's cognitive barriers are non-existent. The harvest will be instantaneous." In the containment bay, Arthur didn't move. He wasn't looking at the alien, nor at the console. He was staring at the wall-mounted junction box that fed power to the containment field. To him, it was a messy, unprofessional wire tangle, a fire hazard. The alien initiated the bypass. A beam of focused violet neuroenergy lanced out from the ceiling, centering on Arthur's skull. This was the Syndicate's ultimate weapon, a tool designed to shatter the ego, to dissolve the sense of self into raw, harvestable data. They expected a scream. They expected a collapse into catatonic bliss. Instead, the console on the bridge emitted a low, discordant groan. "Commander?" the subordinate asked, its head plate twitching. "The subject, he is rejecting the bypass. His neural pathways are not dissolving. They are rerouting." "Rerouting?" Vax spun around. "He is a geriatric human, a biological wreck. How can he reroute a Syndicate neural harvest beam?" "I don't know, Commander. The input is being accepted, but not by his ego. It is triggering a dormant, deep-seated neural layer. It's a manual override sequence. It's a trigger cascade." Down in the bay, the violet beam was no longer a weapon to Arthur. It was a catalyst. The alien energy, probing his mind for fear, hit a section of his brain that had been hardened by 40 years of high-stakes life-or-death engineering. It hit the demolitionist's protocol. Arthur's eyes, until now glassy and unfocused, tightened. He didn't regain his memory. He didn't remember his wife, his house, or his name, but he remembered the timing. He looked at the junction box on the wall. He reached out and with surgical, practiced precision, began to tap the containment field wall. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. On the bridge, the ship shuddered. A warning light flashed deep crimson. "Commander," the subordinate shrieked. "The specimen is vibrating the hard light shielding. He's modulating the containment frequency to match the resonance of the ship's primary power grid. He's creating a harmonic feedback loop." "Shut it down," Vax roared. "I can't. He's got the ship's primary architecture locked into the harvest beam's feedback loop. He's treating the containment field like a switch." Arthur stood back from the wall. He wasn't smiling. He was simply looking at the junction box, satisfied. He had noticed a slight, inefficient load imbalance in the primary bus, and he had corrected it by essentially shorting the circuit against the containment field's energy. He didn't know he was holding a spaceship hostage. He didn't know the ship was now trembling on the brink of a structural collapse. He only knew one thing. He had finally made the vibrations stop. "The hull," the subordinate whispered, staring at the telemetry. "Commander, The hull plating in Sector 4 has just detached. He didn't break it. He just unlatched it. Vax stared at the monitor. The broken, frail human was now sitting on the floor, humming a soft, rhythmic tune, perfectly content. And on the exterior of the arbitrator, a multi-ton panel of matte black composite drifted into the void, perfectly unbolted, as if it had never been part of the ship at all. The corridors of the arbitrator were no longer silent. They screamed. Red emergency lighting bathed the matte black walls in the color of raw arterial blood. The ship, once a masterpiece of clinical efficiency, was now a dying beast. Gravity fluctuated, turning from normal to 0 G and back again in a nauseating rhythmic cycle that threw syndicate officers against the bulkheads. "Report!" Commander Vax bellowed, bracing himself against a vibrating console. "The atmospheric scrubbers are offline," a subordinate shrieked, clutching a datapad that was sparking violently. "And the primary navigation array has been unbolted. Commander, the entire array. It's just floating in the navigation chamber. It wasn't destroyed, it was disassembled." Vax's violet eyes flickered wildly. "This is not a specimen. This is a ghost, a Terran ghost. This is a trained operative, a master of stealth and tactical deconstruction. Locate him. Find the elite human agent and neutralize him before he guts this ship entirely." But there was no elite human agent. 3 decks down, Arthur was having a lovely afternoon. He felt much better now that he'd sorted out that rattling panel. The ship was still a bit messy. Far too many flashing lights, far too many wires running across the floor in completely illogical configurations. But he was getting the hang of it. He walked down the corridor, humming a tune his mother had sung to him in a house that hadn't existed for 40 years. He stopped in front of a glowing, pulsating wallplate, the Syndicate's main distribution node for the ship's internal security network. "Useless clutter," Arthur muttered, shaking his head. "Who wires a room like this? It's a tripping hazard." He didn't see the heavy-duty security lasers that protected the node. He didn't see the warning icons flashing in the Syndicate's native language. He just saw a bulky, buzzing box that was taking up far too much wall space. With a grunt of effort, he reached into his sweater pocket, producing a small, jagged piece of scrap metal he'd found when the hull panel had drifted away. He inserted the edge into the seam of the distribution node and twisted. Snap. The lock gave way. Arthur opened the panel. Behind it, thousands of fiber optic filaments glowed with intense, rhythmic light. "Ah," Arthur said, a serene smile touching his lips. "Found the source of the noise. Just needed a little untangling." He didn't understand the circuitry. He didn't know these were the synaptic links for the ship's entire security force. He simply saw a tangle of wires that looked like a bird's nest. His hands moved with a muscle memory that bypassed his failing brain entirely. He began to unclip the cables, neatly looping them over his arm, effectively disconnecting the ship's security sentries deck by deck. On the bridge, the screen monitoring the security drones went completely black. "Commander," the subordinate whispered, its voice trembling. "The security network. It's gone. Not offline. Gone. He's pulled the entire cognitive map of the ship's defense grid out of the wall." Vax slumped into his command chair, the bioluminescence of his scales dimming into a sickly, terrified gray. He looked at the ship's internal sensors. There was only one biological signature moving, with calm, rhythmic purpose through the ship. It wasn't running. It wasn't hiding. It was just tidying. "He's not a soldier," Vax breathed, realization dawning with the weight of a dying star. He's a cleaner, He's walking through my ship, and he's cleaning it like it's a house with too much junk. The ship lurched, a sound of tearing metal echoing through the entire structure. The gravity dropped to 0 G and stayed there. He's disconnected the gravity stabilizers, the subordinate whispered, staring at the screen. He's not attacking us, Commander. He's just tidying. Arthur floated down the corridor, completely undisturbed. The nest of high-tech fiber optic cables neatly draped over his arm like a bundle of laundry, his face set in a mask of total, terrifying peace. The airlock doors to the bridge hissed open, and Commander Vax stepped through, his honor guard flanking him with plasma rifles set to maximum intensity. He was prepared for a guerrilla fighter. He was prepared for a master of Terran subversion. He was prepared to execute a monster. He was not prepared for what he saw. Arthur was standing before the central console of the Arbitrator's hyperdrive core, the most complex, sensitive piece of technology in the entire Syndicate fleet. He was holding the bundle of security grid cables he'd scavenged earlier like a handful of laundry, his sweater stained with industrial lubricant. He looked up, his brow furrowed in mild professional annoyance. He looked at the commander, then at the honor guard, and finally, he sighed at the open panel of the hyperdrive core. "Oh, good," Arthur said, his voice bright, almost cheerful. "You're the maintenance crew. About time. You wouldn't believe the state of this wiring. It's an absolute disaster." Vax froze. The honor guard hesitated, their weapons trained on the human, but they didn't fire. The sheer, impossible banality of the statement shattered their combat protocols. They were prepared for resistance, for screaming, for threats, not for an elderly man critiquing their infrastructure. "I am High Commander Vax," the alien roared, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and confusion. "Step away from the core. You are currently dismantling a vessel of the Galactic Syndicate. Do you have any idea what you are doing?" Arthur waved a hand, dismissively, completely unfazed by the plasma weaponry pointed at his chest. Yes, I know who you are. The shift supervisor, I presume." He leaned forward, pointing a bony, calloused finger at the intricate pulsing conduits of the hyperdrive. "Look at this. Who routed these? They're live, they're unshielded, and there's a severe load imbalance. You're asking for a blowout." With a calm, rhythmic motion, the muscle memory of 40 years of bomb disposal overriding the fraying synapses of his mind, Arthur reached into the core console, bypassed a containment field that could have incinerated a moon, and pulled a massive, vibrating power relay module from its housing. Click. The entire ship groaned. The artificial gravity failed completely. The honor guard floated into the air, their weapons spinning uselessly out of their reach, their faces etched with the kind of primal terror reserved for creatures that have just realized they are in the presence of something they cannot comprehend. Vax, suspended in the air, his eyes wide, watched in horror as Arthur ignored the physics-defying reality of the situation and carefully set the hyperdrive relay on the deck, lining it up with his other tidied debris. "I'm actually quite busy," Arthur muttered, reaching for another panel. "If you're not here to help, please stand back. You're blocking the light. This is a highly unsafe work environment, and quite frankly, if I weren't already here, I'd have to file a report." He was dismantling the Syndicate's flagship, not because he was a master strategist, but because he was a professional. He had forgotten who he was, what he was, and where he was. But he had not forgotten that he could not abide an unprofessional job. The silence that followed was absolute. The Arbitrator, once the crown jewel of the Galactic Syndicate, was now a hollow tomb. Every life support node, every security grid, every weapon relay, and every propulsion conduit had been systematically pulled apart, reorganized, and laid out on the deck in neat, symmetrical piles. Arthur had finished his shift. He sat on the now cold floor of the bridge, holding a small, faded photograph he had found tucked into a forgotten crevice of the console. He didn't know who the woman in the photo was. He didn't know why his chest ached when he looked at it. He just knew it looked misplaced. He set it down gently, right next to the neatly stacked hyperdrive relay. Commander Vax stood, or rather hovered, in the center of the bridge, his honor guard floating listlessly around him, like debris in the wake of a shipwreck. He looked at his tactical monitors. They were dead. He looked at the external sensors. They were dark. He didn't look at Arthur with hate anymore. He looked at him with the cold, absolute clarity of a creature that has just seen the face of its own extinction. "Prepare the final burst transmission," Vax whispered. "Commander," the subordinate asked, its voice a hollow rattle. "Send it to the Syndicate core. Send it to every quadrant. Do not encrypt. Let them hear it. Let them know." Vax turned his gaze toward the containment field that had failed hours ago. The human was looking out the viewport, watching the stars drift by, humming that same rhythmic, forgotten tune. He was utterly, terrifyingly serene. He didn't know he had destroyed a flagship. He didn't know he was the reason the Syndicate's expansion would end today. He was just a man who had tidied up a messy room. The subordinate initiated the broadcast. Across the galaxy, the Syndicate's network shrieked as the raw, unedited footage of the last 8 hours flooded their channels. "To all Syndicate fleets," Vax began, his voice recording onto the data stream, his eyes locked on the human who wouldn't even turn around to acknowledge him. "We sought a specimen. We found an end. We thought they were a species of glass. We were wrong. They are not the strongest. They are not the fastest. But they are the most dangerous thing in the multiverse because they never, ever give up, even when they forget why they are fighting." Vax paused, his bioluminescence fading into a dull, permanent gray. "If you see a small blue planet, turn around. Because if you wake the giant, you will not live to see the dawn. I repeat, do not go back to the blue planet. We have dismantled a ship. They have dismantled our future." The transmission cut out. Arthur finally turned around. He looked at the alien commander, a faint, polite smile on his face. "You're still here?" Arthur asked, a little surprised. "You're all still here. I've finished the maintenance. Everything's in order now. You can go home. I've tidied up. It's all perfectly safe." He leaned back against the bulkhead, closed his eyes, and let out a deep, satisfied breath. The ship drifted in the silence of the void, a graveyard of technology destroyed by a man who had forgotten everything, except how to finish a job. If you want to know what happened to the Syndicate after that transmission, make sure to like and subscribe and comment below.